Most people believe trauma always looks dramatic, loud, and obvious. They imagine panic attacks, flashbacks, or visible emotional breakdowns. But what if trauma doesn't scream at all? What if it whispers through your habits, your relationships, your silence, and the way you talk to yourself when no one is listening? What if the reason you feel exhausted, disconnected, or different isn't a personality flaw, but something your nervous system learned long ago just to survive?
Complex PTSD doesn't always come from one big event. It often forms slowly, quietly, through repeated emotional neglect, chronic stress, unsafe relationships, or growing up in environments where your needs were ignored, minimized, or punished. And because there was no single moment to point to, many people never realize what they're carrying. One of the most ignored signs of CPTSD is emotional numbness disguised as calm. You might be the person who rarely gets visibly upset, who stays composed in chaos, who doesn't overreact. People may even admire your strength, but inside, emotions feel distant, muted, or unreachable. Joy doesn't fully land. Sadness feels flat. Anger turns inward instead of outward. This isn't emotional maturity. It's a nervous system that learned long ago that feeling too much wasn't safe. So it shut things down just enough to function.
Another overlooked sign is chronic self-doubt that feels logical. You question your decisions, your memories, your reactions, even your needs. You replay conversations repeatedly, wondering if you said too much, felt too much, or misunderstood something obvious. This isn't overthinking for no reason. It often comes from environments where your reality was constantly invalidated, where you were told you were too sensitive, dramatic, or wrong about what you experienced. Over time, your brain learned not to trust itself. Many people with CPTSD are hyper-independent, and society praises them for it. You hate asking for help. You feel uncomfortable relying on anyone. You would rather struggle alone than risk disappointment, rejection, or control. This isn't strength, it's survival. At some point, needing others became unsafe, so you adapted by becoming your own backup plan, even when it hurts. There's also a deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Not physical tiredness, but a bone-deep fatigue that comes from being constantly alert. Your body may feel tense even when nothing is happening. Your mind scans for problems automatically. You're always on, even during rest. This is what long-term nervous system dysregulation looks like, a system that never fully learned how to power down. Another silent pattern is difficulty identifying what you feel. When someone asks how you're doing, your mind goes blank. You default to fine, okay, or tired, not because you're hiding, but because you genuinely don't know. Emotional awareness was never modeled or encouraged, so feelings became confusing signals instead of useful information. Relationships can feel especially complicated. You might crave closeness, but feel suffocated when it appears. Or you stay emotionally distant even with people you love. You may tolerate unhealthy dynamics longer than you should, or cut people off suddenly without explanation. These aren't random behaviors. They're protective strategies shaped by past experiences where connection came with pain, unpredictability, or loss. Another commonly missed sign is a harsh inner voice that feels like motivation. You push yourself relentlessly. You criticize mistakes intensely. You struggle to rest without guilt. This voice often sounds like authority, logic, or discipline, but it's usually internalized survival programming. At some point, being hard on yourself felt safer than being vulnerable or imperfect. Many people with CPTSD also minimize their past.
You tell yourself others had it worse. You downplay what happened. You avoid calling it trauma at all. But trauma isn't measured by how bad it looks. It's measured by how deeply it changed your nervous system. If something forced you to adapt in ways that still affect you today, it mattered.
There's also a pattern of emotional over-responsibility. You feel responsible for other people's moods. You adjust yourself to keep peace. You sense shifts in energy instantly and react before anyone says a word. This hyper-awareness once kept you safe, but now it keeps you exhausted.
Sometimes CPTSD shows up as a constant feeling of being behind in life. You may feel emotionally younger than your age, or like everyone else received a guidebook you missed. This isn't immaturity, it's the result of growing up focused on survival instead of development.
One of the most painful signs is the belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you, not situationally, not temporarily, but at your core. This belief is rarely spoken out loud, yet it quietly shapes choices, relationships, and self-worth. It often comes from early experiences where love, safety, or approval felt conditional.
Healing doesn't begin with forcing positivity or letting go. It begins with recognition, with understanding that these patterns didn't appear out of nowhere. They were intelligent responses to environments that required adaptation. You're not broken, you're patterned. When you start seeing these signs, not as flaws, but as signals, something shifts. Compassion replaces confusion, curiosity replaces shame, and the nervous system slowly begins to feel safer. If any of this resonated, it doesn't mean you're doomed or defined by trauma. It means your system learned how to survive, and survival is not the same as living. Awareness is the first step toward rewiring, not all at once, not perfectly, but gently, consistently, and at your own pace. You don't need to relive the past to heal it. You need to understand how it still lives in your present. And once you see it clearly, you can start choosing differently. Not because you're forcing change, but because safety is finally becoming possible. You were never weak for adapting. You were resourceful. And now you're allowed to build a life that doesn't require constant defense. That's not denial. That's recovery.